Hello, Tungsten Miner here. Today I'm going to talk about thermal expansion and its related mods, thermal foundation, COFH core, and thermal dynamics. As you can see though, between them, there's a lot to talk about, so let's get started here. First up, let's talk about the world gen stuff that gets added. So you can see over here, in addition to the ores that we're used to seeing, our iron ore and gold ore and so on, we've got copper, tin, silver, lead, nickel, and platinum. And all of these are going to show up at different layers in your worlds, very much like you're used to seeing gold down deep and iron up high. You can consult the documentation to see exactly where they are because this is configurable, so it may be different in your mod pack. Next up, we have these oil sands. So these things, when you mine them, are going to produce a brief puddle of oil and a piece of bitumen. Now, what you can do with this is use it in a furnace, just like you would coal, except it lasts twice as long. And you can also throw it into one of the machines that we're going to talk about later to turn it into crude oil, which is an excellent source of energy, as you might expect. So, unfortunately, this is very new to this mod, and I think it's probably going to keep changing for a bit. At the moment, it's very hard to find, but hopefully it will. They'll adjust the balance of things, make it a little easier to come by. Same deal here for this oil shale. It's basically the same thing except in gravel. This stuff you'd expect to find in deserts where there's lots of sand. This stuff you'd expect to find in colder climates where there's a lot more gravel. Over here, we've got some destabilized redstone ore. And you can see it kind of looks a lot like regular redstone ore, but it's not quite the same. Anyway, when you break yourself off a piece of this, you very briefly see a flash of a redstone liquid, which is added by the mod, and you get a piece of destabilized clathrate. Now, this stuff can be used, melted down, in fact, into a liquid form of redstone called destabilized redstone. And that itself has a ton of different uses, which we'll talk about in due course when we talk about this magma crucible machine. Next up, we have Energized Netherrack, and if you look carefully, you can see little drips of something going up towards the sky. And if I mine a piece of this, we have a little bit of liquid glowstone floating up into the ceiling. So of course glowstone is always found on the roofs of caverns, and now we know why. In its liquid form, it actually ascends to the sky. This energized clathrate can be used to make a liquid form of glowstone called energized glowstone that we just saw departing skyward. And that too has a bunch of different uses we'll talk about in due course. And then finally, we have, not surprisingly, the same kind of thing in the end. That little bit of liquid end stuff basically is like liquid enderpearl. And anytime anything touches a liquid enderpearl, it gets teleported involuntarily, including items, as we just saw. So this guy, this resonant clathrate, when you throw it into the same magma crucible, you get liquid ender. It's called Resonant Ender. And as you might expect, that has a number of different uses in this mod too. Okay, so the last bit of new world gen is actually in the form of a couple of different mobs. So here we have a basalts, a blaze, a blitz, and a blizz. But wait, you say, blaze, wait a minute. That's one of the vanilla Minecraft creatures. And yes, of course it is. And now you know exactly what all the rest of these things look like and how they behave and all the things that they can do and they can't do. Because all of the rest of them are the other elementals, right? So if you think of the blaze as being a fire elemental, then the basalts is an earth elemental, the blitz is a sky elemental, and the blizz is a water elemental in the form of a frozen sort of blaze creature. Just like we get blaze rods from blazes, we get rods from all of our different creatures, and just like we can convert those into blaze powder, we can convert all of the rest of those things into various kinds of powders. I will talk about what these are good for a little bit later on, because they require various machines and processing and so on to make them useful. Suffice to say, you'll want as much of this stuff as you can get your hands on. Anyway, so that's it for new world gen. Let's move on and talk about what you can do with some of this stuff. Okay, so having seen the world gen, let's talk a little bit about what else you can do with the basic stuff. So here's a copper ore block. You can throw that in a furnace, get yourself some ingots. You can make them into blocks, just like anything else. You can make them into armor, just like anything else, iron, gold, what have you. And you can even make them into tools. All of the different metals all have all of the things that you'd expect them to. Blocks, ingots, armor, tools. You also have these two new tools, a sickle and a hammer. The sickle, let me pick that up again. The sickle allows you to cut down plants in a 3x3 area with one stroke. And it does the same just as though you had done that with your fist on each plant individually. So you can see I managed to get myself some seeds by doing that. So it's a very fast way to trim down some extra plant life. The hammer is basically the same kind of thing except for the pickaxe, where you start digging and you get a 3x3 area dug up all at once. Makes very short work and very long, easy tunnels. Now, I've chosen copper here as pretty much the cheapest and easiest material, but it also means that these tools are going to be a lot less durable and they're going to be a lot less useful than tools made with a more sturdy metal. So for example, this copper sword, instead of doing 6 damage, it does 4.75 attack damage. And if we look at some of the other swords, we can see there's all of these other choices that do more and more damage. So bronze does 6, Invar does 7, Electrum is less, Platinum does 8, so on and so forth. So when you're thinking about your tools, think about the different metals available, how much of which ones you've got, and that should help you decide which ones are going to be the most useful for you. Okay, before diving into the details of all these different machines and game mechanics and stuff, I thought it might be useful to walk through a simple example which kind of touches on almost all of the different parts of the mod in, like I said, one really simple, small example, so things don't get too overwhelming. So what we're seeing here, this is what's called a device, a machine that operates without power, and it collects water from the environment. It's dropping it into this fluid duct, which just moves fluids from one place to another, into a dynamo. This happens to be a steam dynamo, so it's going to take coal or whatever other fuel you might push into a furnace and heat up the water, producing steam, and then turn that into electrical power. Now, the electrical power system in this mod is called Redstone Flux, or RF power for short. So you're going to see a lot of that. And all of the units are going to be in RF units. So that's the standard way that power, or electrical power, is measured in this mod. That's going to go into this leadstone conduit, which is how you move power around. That's plugged into the backs of these two different machines. This first machine is going to take any kind of ore and crush it up into a dust, a pulverized whatever it is. So if I've got iron ore up here, I'm going to get pulverized iron as the output. And in fact, I'm going to get 2 pulverized iron for every piece of ore I throw in there. So this whole mechanism here is actually a very early game way of producing 2 iron ingots, or whatever ingots, for every block of ore that you find. So you can double your output. This is an item duct, and it just moves items from one place to another. So when this machine is done producing dust, it's going to shove it into this pipe, which is going to connect it to this redstone furnace. Redstone furnace, just like a regular vanilla furnace, except instead of burning some kind of fuel to produce heat, it's going to use redstone flux, or RF power, to produce heat. When it's done, whatever it's finished cooking or smelting or what have you, is going to get moved into this orange area, and ultimately that's going to get thrown over into this chest over here. So, let's go back through one more time, except stop a little bit longer on each of these machines and drill in a bit deeper. This thing is called an Aqueous Accumulator, and it's a device, meaning no power, which just collects water, and the more water blocks around it, the faster it does that. I've got it configured so that it's going to output the water on the top. Now if you notice the side, there's that kind of 3-section side there. If I click this panel, it's going to change it to also, if there's a pipe there, output on that side. You can see that orange sort of plug on the side. If I click again, it's going to go away. This machine can't accept inputs, so it's only going to deal with outputs. And it's turned right now so that its output is automatically enabled. I don't have to do anything. It's going to force that water into the pipe. So otherwise I might have to have some other mechanism that deals with that. So the water is going to get shoved in the pipe, automatically come down here into this steam engine, or steam dynamo as it's called. Here I've got a slot for coal. I've got a tank for water, which is coming in through that pipe. And when I turn the machine on, it's going to start burning up the coal, and it's going to produce steam in this chamber over here. But it's turned off right now because I'm using this redstone control panel. And what this allows me to do is to change the machine's status based upon whether or not there's a redstone signal nearby. So at the moment, I've got it on this low setting, which means the machine will be running if there is not a redstone signal nearby. Right now, I've got a lever attached to it, but the lever is in the off position, is in the on position, so it's producing a redstone signal, which means it's not low, right? Got it? It's a little complicated. This will only turn off if there is not a redstone signal, and since there is a redstone signal from this lever, it's going to be turned off. As soon as I throw the lever, or if I changed it to high, the machine would come on. But I'm not going to do that quite yet. Let's move on to talk about some of these other things. So these conduits, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of power conduits. This is the cheapest one, and that's why we're dealing with it right now. It's going to move power into these machines. This machine is also got its configuration set up so that it's got items coming from the top moving into the input area, and it's taking all of its output items and moving it out on the right-hand side. Now you notice there's two sections here. There's always a primary output, right? So if I put iron ore over here, I should expect iron, pulverized iron over here. But every once in a while, and it varies depending upon what your inputs are, you might get some extra stuff down here. So with iron, for example, every once in a while, like a quarter of the time or something, you're going to get a bit of nickel, pulverized nickel down here, as well as getting your iron. And remember, you get 2 iron dust for every 1 ore, so this is a great way to get a lot more output from your digging around. This is an item duct. There's really only one kind, although you can upgrade this to go a little bit faster. Finally, that's going to end up in here, and we can see this is configured, so it's accepting inputs into the input area on the left, and it's taking its outputs and sending them out on the right. And its redstone control is just ignored. It doesn't care what redstone signal there is right next to it. Okay, so let's turn this thing on and see what it does. There is no longer a redstone signal. I've turned that switch off, which means it's now satisfied that there's a low condition, and therefore the engine is now running. We can see it's grabbed up some of the coal, it's produced some steam, and it's actually producing power, but the power is getting moved into this conduit so quickly that none of it's building up in the reservoir in the steam dynamo. Eventually it will once it's powered up everything else. Anyway, so now we should expect this machine, yep, got plenty of power, and this machine's got plenty of power. So now we just need to get this guy to start accepting inputs. As you can see, I've got a chest up here with some iron ore in it. And I can now change the configuration to say automatically input. So auto input is disabled right now, but if I click this, it's now enabled, and it's going to start pulling the iron ore from the chest into the pulverizer. And bit by bit, it's going to grind it up into iron dust, and hopefully, if we get lucky, it'll produce a little bit of extra nickel dust down here too. Now, I also have this auto output enabled, so eventually, and there it goes, the pulverized iron is going to get pushed out into that item duct and wind up in the redstone furnace. And as the redstone furnace processes each piece of pulverized iron, it's going to smelt it into an iron ingot. So if I let this process run to completion, I should wind up with twice as many iron ingots as I had iron ore to start with. Over here, I've got a couple of tools that help me manage my setups here. The first one, this Crescent Hammer, is basically just a tool for moving things around. So you can see I can change the orientation of this chest just by right-clicking on it. And if I left click, it's just basically like a generic pickaxe or something. So I can move around any of these pieces just by clicking on this thing. And of course, if I were to move this, it's still going to try to send its outputs along its right-hand side, but that right-hand side will no longer connect with that pipe. So you sometimes want to rearrange your machines to make the ductwork and the piping line up properly. This thing is a multimeter. I can use it to click on anything that's producing power, and it will give me a bunch of data about exactly what's going on with that thing. It's almost kind of a programmer debug tool. And you can try clicking on different things to get different pieces of information about it. So I can get information about how much energy is in this thing. I can get information about what is in this duct and what ducts it's connected to. Very detailed stuff. So use it at your peril. Anyway, so that's a complete setup to do one simple task using a couple of different devices and machines, producing a little bit of power, and talking about the various redstone control and configuration panels that show up on pretty much all of the machines in thermal expansion. Okay, just one last thing to talk about before we dive into all of the detailed examinations of each machines, and that has to do with the upgrade system. So in thermal expansion, all of the different machines can be upgraded to support what are called augments. And these are various things that add different pieces of functionality to the machine. So let's take a look at this one here. This is a sawmill. Its primary purpose, as you might expect, is to convert logs into planks. And it does this more efficiently than your normal crafting recipe, so you get 6 planks for every log that you throw in there. So even that by itself is generally pretty worthwhile. But you see I've got this augmentation panel over here, and it says upgrade required. Right now, this is a basic sawmill, and that means that no augments at all. But if I want to use some, I can make myself one of these hardened upgrade kits, and the recipe is for all of the different upgrades, some kind of gear, some kind of metal, and then usually redstone. So we can take a look at this one, or some kind of other material. So hardened glass of some sort here, electrum and a silver gear. This needs cryothium dust, which is actually produced from that blizz powder we were looking at before. So get some niter snowball redstone. That gets you with blizz powder cryothium. So this guy gets you another upgrade, and then this upgrade uses other stuff, right? So what we can do is apply these upgrades, and every time you apply one of these upgrades, you can add another augment to the machine. So let's try that out. You have to do them in order. So if I try to apply this end here resonant upgrade to this machine, it's going to say unable upgrade block. So I have to start with hardened, successfully upgraded. And now if I look at that machine and look at this augment panel, I've got one slot for augmentation. If I want more than that, I can right click and give it another augment. And you notice the corners and borders change a bit, so you can tell how far augmented or how far upgraded a machine is. Now I've got 2 sections in my augment panel. That'll make it for 3, and that'll make it for 4. So that's the highest we can go. And now we've got 4 augmentation panels. Over here, I've also got these conversion kits. And basically what these do is they apply a bunch of augments all at once. So looking at the recipe for this guy, no surprise. Here you go. You need all of the augments. Or you need the conversion kit for one area plus the extras, or the conversion kit plus an extra. So whichever way you do it, whether you use the upgrades one by one or whether you use the conversion kits, you're making the same stuff and it costs you the same materials. But now let's take a look at some of the augments that apply pretty universally across the board for most machines. So first is this auxiliary reception coil. That's going to make the machine process things faster, but it's also going to need more power to run. This thing, the auxiliary sieve, is going to make it so that whatever your secondary output is, you've got a better chance of seeing that. So when we were just looking at the pulverizer over there, we had a chance of getting some nickel while we are pulverizing that iron. Well, this increases that chance. Here, we've got a nullification chamber. So this secondary output sometimes is not actually very useful. So for example, in a sawmill here, we're going to produce a lot of sawdust. And maybe we don't care about the sawdust. We don't want the sawdust. And we kind of want it to just like go away if there's extra. So we're just going to throw this nullification chamber in there. And that's going to get rid of any excess sawdust and just disappear it. You've also noticed, I'm sure, that some of these machines are a lot faster than others. There are some augmentations which allow you to make them go further. And in fact, if I had more than one of these augmentations, I could install a whole bunch of these. In fact, I could have all 4 of these be just speed augments. So you can actually put in as many of whatever kind of augments as you want. There's no limitation. However, there's this other kind of thing, this augment called a specialization. These you can only use one of. So these augments are just upgrades, right? They just make your machine work a little better or slightly more efficiently or use less power or whatever their difference is. But here we're saying, actually, we're going to turn this into a slightly different kind of machine. So I'm going to drop this in here, and this one in particular makes it so that when we are sawing planks, we can collect resin. So for every plank we saw, we're getting a teeny little bit of sap in this case, because it's oak wood. Resin would be from spruce wood. And it's going to collect this up. Now this sap or resin or whatever the output is also winds up getting used in various other recipes in different places. So this can be a really, really handy resource and a way to collect some of that stuff more easily. But you have to go ahead and make yourself one of these upgrades in order to do that. And the recipes for these things generally involve some kind of plate. I'll talk about where you can make those. Some kind of gear, and the recipes for gears are always an iron ingot with whatever kind of metal around it. One of these redstone servos, and you'll get to making a whole lot of these, so memorize this recipe. And this one's particular because, you know, it's a resin funnel, so we need a bucket and some redstone to go along with it. So that gives you your basic upgrade system. You've got your conversion kits to upgrade all at once. You've got your upgrade, what are they called? Proper name is upgrade kits to upgrade one at a time. And every time you upgrade, you get another slot for adding more augments. And there's a whole bunch of different augments for different machines that allow you to add extra capabilities to each and every one, just about, of the machines in thermal expansion. So your base tool is not the best you can do. And I think that's where we'll stop for this time. Next time, I'm going to jump in with detailed walkthroughs of all of the different machines, and we'll see how far we get in that list of machines. There's quite a lot of them. So anyway, if you like this video, hit like. If you want to know when that next video is ready, hit subscribe, and I will talk to you later.